Hello, welcome everyone. My name is Hussein Omar. I'll be the host for this webinar. If you could let me know if you can hear me in the attendee chat over on the left side of your screen, that would be great. If you can see and hear us.
Oh, thank you, Carol.
All right. Okay, great. Thanks. So again, my name is Hussein. I'll be the host. So what that means is that I'll be responding to questions, chats. If anybody has any problems with the audio or visual aspects, just let me know. You should be able to contact me on the left side of your screen. We will be doing a question and answer at the end after the major part of the presentation. And this also will be recorded, so we'll be able to, you can share this later or see this later as well. So, okay. And with that, I present Layli Miller-Muro, who will be presenting the presentation that she actually gave at the Association for Baha'i Studies this year, based on her work for social justice and non-partisanship. So, hand it over to you.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to what I hope will be a virtual conversation. I think the times that we're living in are really hard right now, particularly as Baha'is innately care deeply about what's happening in the world and care a lot about social justice issues. We're agitated, we're angry, we're eager, we're impatient, and like all people who have felt very affected by not just recent events, frankly, but years and years and years and years of events, there's just a urgent desire to do more and to try to respond. And we know that in the Baha'i writings, we have responses that are given to us by the Baha'i writings that are meant to transform society. And we have particular principles and laws that we know are meant to heal the ills of humankind. But as Baha'is, I don't think we actually know how to apply them. We're all struggling. We're all trying to figure it out. Nobody knows exactly how to do it. And so we're all on this journey. And one of the aspects of the journey is trying to figure out how to be socially engaged, how to engage in social action and promote social justice, while at the same time being faithful to the guidance in the writings about non-involvement in partisan politics. And it's particularly hard now. I mean, I won't lie that, you know, I've been engaged in policy work through the Tahirih Justice Center on behalf of immigrant women and girls who are fleeing violence for about 20 years. And I don't remember a more difficult time to not be framed in one way or another, to not be labeled in one way or another, to be able to refrain from labeling others and still be in the movement. It's hard. And so there's a particularly difficult time I think we're living in right now to navigate how to be nonpartisan. So what I'm going to share in the webinar is basically in three different parts. One is to talk about the unequivocal, I think unambiguous, emphatic guidance in the Baha'i writings to engage in social justice causes. And I think sometimes in the Baha'i community, we are concern rightfully about being careful and cautious, but that cautiousness can go too far sometimes and prevent us from engagement, because whenever we're like too worried about something, it usually holds us back from doing anything at all. And I see that sometimes in the Baha'i community. So first, I want to talk about just the encouragement in the Baha'i writings to engage in social action. Then I'll talk about my interpretation. And you know, the Baha'i faith has no clergy. And so it's really left to every Baha'i to interpret what Baha'i writings mean to every individual believer. And so I offer my interpretation of the Baha'i writings, and others may have different views. And that's completely okay in the Baha'i faith for people to have different interpretations. So I'll be sharing my interpretation of the Baha'i guidance on the way we are to engage in social action and avoid partisan politics. And then finally, I'll talk about the Tahirih Justice Center's experience as one experiment in how to engage in policy advocacy and avoid partisan politics. So I mentioned before that we're living at a very interesting time, and I want to reflect on that a little bit. Those of you who are watching the news and reading newspapers know the obvious parts of the unique time that we're living in. But there's a quotation in the Baha'i writings that talks about humanity waking up from our slumber and getting off of the bed of heedlessness. And when I think about that quotation, it blows me away, because I think, like, what does that look like really? What does it look like to wake up from a deep, deep slumber of ignorance and negligence and racism and sexism and all of these kinds of things? And I have to imagine it's not pretty. I mean, when you wake up from a deep, deep slumber, maybe you've slept longer than you should, 14 hours or something like that. When we wake up from that, it's not pretty. Our hair is disheveled, our breath probably stinks. We may not even really know where we are, and we might be feeling really disoriented. People wake up from deep slumber, wake up from their beds of heedlessness in different ways. Some like pop up and go, "Good morning," and are right in your face in a way that makes it clear they're not even sure what day it is. And then others wander around aimlessly until they finally wake up. And so I can only imagine that one quotation is giving us some clue into the collective state of mind of humanity as we slowly wake up from this deep slumber of negligence and ignorance and this bed of heedlessness. So many people are traumatized. People are slowly waking up, but many have been awoke for a long time and have been literally. And in fact, watching the news right now is considered a mental health issue for some. There have been a lot of discussions in mental health circles and social justice circles around being traumatized by what's happening. And it's a thing. It's a new thing right now. Shoghi Effendi talked very directly about the onrushing calamities, the cataclysmic forces that are to convulse human society. He says that humanity's heedlessness, impenitent, is admittedly hovering on the edge of an awful abyss, ready to precipitate itself into that titanic struggle, that crucible, whose chastening fires alone whose chastening fires alone can and will wield its antagonistic elements of race, class, religion, and nation into one coherent system, one world common faith. We're told that the hour is approaching when the most great convulsion will have appeared. I swear by God, the promised day is come, the day when the tormenting trials will have surged above your heads and beneath your feet, saying, "Taste ye what your hands have wrought." In the same message, Shoghi Effendi says, we're witnessing the confusion and the breakdown of human institutions and the ensuing epoch during which the shattered basis of a dismembered society is to be recast and its forces reshaped, redirected, and unified. Just the imagery of that is very traumatizing. To be dismembered and recast and its forces reshaped and redirected and unified. These are very intense quotations, which, by the way, I have shared with you. There is a part of this webinar where you can share documents, and I've collected all the quotations that I'll be using in my presentation, and I've ordered them in the order that I'll be discussing them. And so if you want to open that shared document and read the quotes along, that's absolutely fine, and you can do that. So let's see. Sorry, I just want to make sure everyone is getting, okay, great. Okay, so the thing about the trauma that we're enduring, the cataclysmic forces, the dismemberment, and all of these things that this quotation tells us, it's happening to society necessarily in order for society to grow and evolve. We might ask ourselves, well, what can we do about it? And it can feel really frustrating because there's a lot that's going on that we actually can't do anything about. But then there is a lot going on that we can do something about. And so it's up to us to figure that out. And then to figure it out as individuals, given our own skills and capacities and commitments, what can we personally do? But particularly in the Baha'i writings talk about what we can do. And we have a very unique role to play as Baha'is. Our actions are not just about our own spiritual development, or getting points in the Apa Kingdom. It's about the fundamental question about whether we really care about each other or not. And Baha'is are asked to answer that question as a community, whether we care about others or not. Because our failure to engage will mean the unnecessary suffering of humanity. Shoghi Effendi warns us, though powerless to avert the impending contest, the followers of Baha'u'llah, so we are powerless actually, to avert the impending contest. The followers of Baha'u'llah can, by the spirit they evince and the efforts they exert, help to circumscribe its range, shorten its duration, allay its hardships, proclaim its salutary consequences, and demonstrate its necessary and vital role in the shaping of human destiny. Theirs, Baha'is, is the duty to hold aloft and undimmed the torch of divine guidance as the shades of night descend upon and ultimately envelop the entire human race. Shoghi Effendi goes on to say that by the sublimity and serenity of their faith, I've got to work on the serenity part, by the steadiness and clarity of their vision, the incorruptibility of their character, the rigor of their discipline, and the sanctity of their morals, the unique example of their community life, they can indeed, must in a world polluted within its incurable corruptions, paralyzed by its haunting fears, torn by its devastating hatreds, and languishing under the weight of its appalling misery, demonstrate the vitality of their claim to be regarded as the sole repository of that grace. That's a huge responsibility. The sole repository of that grace, upon whose operation must depend the complete deliverance and fundamental reorganization and the supreme felicity of all mankind. So in this quotation, we're told we can't really control all the crap that's coming. We can't control that. We can't control the disintegration, the dismemberment, the calamities, and all of these things that are necessarily happening to humanity in order to reorient and reorder it. But what we can control is its range, its duration, the level of hardship, and its consequences. And so that quotation is profound to me. It also kind of makes me feel better because it helps me as a Baha'i understand where I can do something and then where I really can't. Somebody asked a question about the quotations. I have attached all the quotations as a document to this webinar. And so feel free to open the document that I've attached and you can read the quotations along as well. And let me know if for some reason you can't see that attached document. Oh, okay, I'm being told it's not showing up anywhere. Maybe. I'm wondering, that's interesting. Let me just try one more time to share it. Oh, okay. Oh, Hussein, you can share it. Awesome. Thank you so much. So I did what I thought would work to share it. Oh, there it is. Yay. Okay, good. So sorry about that. Thank you for letting me know. And hopefully you guys will be able to see it. Okay, awesome. So I'm going to keep going. And by the way, if you have substantive questions, I think feel free to, as the spirit moves you, go ahead and ask the questions. I may wait until the very end to answer all the questions, but feel free to raise them as you have them. Okay, so we've talked about this awful time we're living in, how traumatic it is, how cataclysmic it is. Now we've talked a little bit about this really unique role that as Baha'is we can play, both the stuff we can't do, the things we can't control, and then also the things that we can do and what we really can control. And so our responsibility is not only to share the healing message of Baha'u'llah, and I'll be reading more quotations about the fact that one of the biggest ways we can help shorten the duration, allay the hardships, and all of these things that we just talked about is by teaching the faith. And that is told to us again and again and again. Building the Baha'i community, building the Baha'i administration, and teaching the faith is one of the most important things we can do. in order to allay all of these hardships and help humanity. But we can also, we need to be speaking up, not only to allay mankind's suffering, but also to prevent humanity from like spinning its wheels, basically. Shoghi Effendi says, humanity, whether viewed in the light of man's individual conduct or in the existing relationships between organized communities and nations, has alas strayed too far and suffered too great a decline to be redeemed. Now, this is profound, I think, because I've had to do soul searching, frankly, in my own work, because as a legal advocate, I think sometimes I'm in the business of band-aided laws and policies. And I've done a lot of soul searching lately about just how we've got to blow the whole thing up, essentially. And even our best efforts to band-aid this particular structure or this system probably isn't the true solution. And the system just kind of needs to be not blown up in a violent way, but, well, in a spiritually violent way, maybe. I mean, it's going to be crumbling. It's going to be falling. We're told that it will disintegrate. We're told that it will become dismembered. And that's not a peaceful process. And it's not about band-aiding. So anyway, sorry, I digress. So it says, humanity has strayed too far and suffered too great a decline to be redeemed through the unaided efforts of the best among its recognized rulers and statesmen. However disinterested their motives, however concerted their action, however unsparing in their zeal and devotion to its cause. So these are like really good people. Shoghi Effendi acknowledges that. And they have really good ideas. But even still, no scheme which the calculations of the highest statesmanship may yet devise, no doctrine which the most distinguished exponents of economic theory may hope to advance, no principle which the most ardent of moralists may strive to inculcate can provide, in the last resort, adequate foundation upon which the future of a distracted world can be built. So to me, I mean, actually, all of these quotations are just, I feel like you could spend a whole evening dissecting them and really talking about them. So there is something unique in Baha'u'llah's message, in this gift that we have in the Baha'i writings to build humanity. And it is unique. And it's something that we have an obligation to try to share with others. And I should explain, by the way, that, there may be some who are not Baha'is who are listening to this webinar. And I want to just take a brief moment to explain the context in which Baha'is believe that Baha'u'llah's solutions, and the Baha'i writings in particular, are the medicine for humanity today and are the healing, like what will heal the ills of humanity. The reason is because Baha'is believe in progressive revelation. And the idea behind it basically is that God reveals messages and teachings through prophets of God, sometimes called manifestations of God, messengers of God, or teachers. They come about every 1,000 to 2,000 years. And when they come, they are relevant. They're relevant to the culture and the time and the place in which they came. And they gave laws and principles that were relevant and would help humanity at that particular time in humanity's evolution. So not unlike a second grade teacher will be teaching math in a second grade way for second graders, an 11th grade teacher is going to be teaching math in an 11th grade way. They will be different. There'll be different lessons. They'll be taught in different ways. But they won't contradict each other. The 11th grade math will be simply built upon the foundation that was set on the second grade math. And so it would be silly for the 11th grader to say, my teacher is inherently superior to your teacher, you second grader. Because these teachers are both equally smart, but because they're so smart, they were relevant in their teaching to the capacity of the age that they were teaching in. And we believe that Baha'u'llah is the most recent messenger of God to this day. And we believe that Christ was from God, Muhammad was from God, Moses, Krishna, Buddha, Zoroaster, and Baha'is believe in all religions and that they were all building blocks on each other. So Baha'is don't see religion as contradictory or in competition with each other. We believe they build on each other. And so we believe that Baha'u'llah has come to humanity today in order to both affirm and reiterate the messages of the past, but to also add to that guidance and give us more sophisticated lessons and help us apply spiritual principles, which are reflected in all faiths, to current day social, economic, and political issues. So this is why Baha'is believe that these messages are so powerful to today, because they were written for today. They weren't written for 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago. But Baha'is do not believe that our religion is better than any religion, or Baha'u'llah is better than any other prophet, but we believe that it was tailored for today's time. So as I go through this, you'll kind of be hearing that theme again and again. And if you're new to this concept of progressive revelation, I just wanted to make sure to explain it. So, okay. Now, also on this notion of the uniqueness of the message of Baha'is. So it is unique that Baha'u'llah has come to this time, at this time, well, in the mid-1800s is when he came to humanity. He passed away in 1892. But his laws and teachings relate to today's issues. But to be clear, Baha'is do not have a monopoly on Baha'i principles or laws. We believe that when Baha'u'llah came, there was kind of an energy that was released throughout the world that changed the way people thought about many things throughout the world. It's actually fascinating if you look at the number of inventions, our tribalism versus looking more nationally and internationally. Many of these changes happened during this time. And so Baha'is don't have a monopoly on Baha'i principles, and many other people are getting them without even knowing that there's a Baha'i faith out there or Baha'i principles. But Baha'is have direct guidance from Baha'u'llah on how to apply them. So just to give you some examples, race unity. So there are many people who are not Baha'is who believe in race unity. And this notion that racism is bad and that the inferiority or the enslavement of whole groups of people is morally wrong is a pervasive understanding that the world has today. Now, there are many people who don't, and there are many people who are behind, and there are many people who are lagging on that or slacking on that. So I'm not trying to say this is perfect, but in the majority, it is no longer publicly acceptable to believe in slavery. It is no longer acceptable to believe in the inherent inferiority of people because of their race. And that has been a change over the last 150 years, because 200 years ago, that was like a pervasive belief. And so we have evolved. But then the Baha'i writings add with specificity to that issue by, for example, talking very directly to people of African descent and people of Caucasian descent in America, like that specific, and give us guidance on how we need to get our sense of superiority in check, how we have to make incredible efforts at race unity and healing. And we're given this really specific guidance. So the larger perfume of this notion of the unity of humankind is wafting throughout the world, and Baha'is don't have a monopoly on that. But we have guidance in the Baha'i writings that we're lucky to be able to turn to, and that we need to be sharing with the world. Gender equality, same thing. It used to be expected and completely normal to hit your wife. It still happens. It happens a lot. But at least in most countries, it is no longer okay. And if you do it, you're considered to have a problem. That's a huge improvement from where we were 100 years ago. But in the Baha'i writings, we have even more specific guidance, like the preferential treatment of girls in education, and a number of other principles. Immigration, same thing. People have been very territorial for most of our history. We've been in this kind of toddler stage of mine, mine, mine. And Baha'u'llah talked about the earth as but one country and mankind its citizens. And, you know, I can't wait for that principle to waft over humankind a little bit more. But right now we're very obsessed with borders and walls. Okay, so if we have these principles, how are we going to help promote them throughout the world? Well, we have to be involved in social justice issues and law and policy. And so let's be clear that social change is, in fact, the primary purpose of the Baha'i faith. The Universal House of Justice, in a letter written in 2001, says very, very directly, the issue of social justice, as you know, is central to the Baha'i revelation. So I don't want to suggest that you use it as a weapon, but memorize this quote, because it's a really helpful quotation, I think, to just make it super clear that, it's very clear. The issue of social justice is, as you know, central to the Baha'i revelation. This has been clearly reinforced again and again and again In 1941, Shoghi Effendi said, "Movements for social progress and social justice, as long as they are disassociated from both political and religious partisanship." It's interesting, political and religious partisanship, "should be supported by those Baha'is who feel urged to undertake such work." Okay, and then we need a lot of clarity on this point. And so again, in 2001, the House of Justice said to an individual believer, "Yet another is the concern you mentioned to avoid involvement in any form of partisan political action. This principle should not, however, be misunderstood. The program of the Baha'i cause itself operates in the political realm. The program of the Baha'i cause itself operates in the political realm to the extent that it is concerned with inducing changes in public policy and behavior at a local, national, and international level." So we are very concerned. We operate at a political level, and we are seeking to change public policy. Okay. Again, in 2008, the House of Justice said, "The term politics can have a broad meaning, and therefore it's important to distinguish between partisan political activity and discourse, an action intended to bring about constructive social change. While the former is proscribed, the latter is enjoined." Okay, so the former, meaning partisan political activity, is proscribed. We're not supposed to do that. But discourse and action intended to bring about constructive social change, we are enjoined to engage in, we are encouraged to engage in. Indeed, a central purpose of the Baha'i community is social transformation. Baha'is must therefore be tireless in addressing through word and deed a range of social issues. Particularly important to my work at the Tahirih Justice Center, in the same letter, we are told that involvement in social discourse and action will at times require that Baha'is become associated with the development of public policy. So that is okay. We're told explicitly that we are allowed to be involved in the development of public policy. In this regard, the term policy, like the term politics, has broad meaning. While refraining from discussions of policies pertaining to political relations between nations or partisan political affairs within a country, Baha'is will no doubt contribute to the formulation and implementation of policies that address certain social concerns. And they list a bunch of issues that we should totally be involved in. Okay, and then finally, because we were still confused as a Baha'i community just a few months ago, April 27th, 2017, and I highly recommend this letter, by the way. It's a brilliant letter, April 27th, 2017, from the House of Justice, clarified to an individual that the principles of non-involvement in politics and obedient to government, far from being obstacles to social change, are aspects of an approach set forth in the Baha'i writings to implement effective remedies for and address the root cause of ills afflicting society. This approach includes active involvement in the life of society, as well as the possibility of influencing and contributing to the social policies of government by all lawful means. Indeed, service to others and to society is the hallmark of Baha'i life. That's a really great letter, by the way. I encourage you to read it, and it's great for Baha'i communities to really reflect on. So to be actively engaged in the promotion of social justice is to support this twin process that's described in the Baha'i writings of the disintegration of the old world order and the old foundations in societies, old structures that are no longer working, that may have always been in contradiction of spiritual principles, and also the building up of a new world order and new structures. It's this very confusing, simultaneous, and parallel process. And so we are all engaging in this process as a Baha'i community. Okay, so now let's talk about the parameters. So now we're clear, hopefully, that we're living in really difficult times. Hopefully, we're clear on the fact that we have an obligation, in fact, as Baha'is, to engage in social justice issues and to help develop public policy and to help bring Baha'u'llah's healing message to humanity for this time and this age. So then the question is, how do we do it? And the devil is kind of in the details, I think, on how we engage in social action and social justice. So there are, in my opinion, and again, we don't have clergy, and so this is just one perspective. Everyone should obviously read the Baha'i writings and derive their own conclusions and meaning. But as I read the Baha'i writings, I find 6 points of guidance in particular. 6 rules, basically, to engaging in social action while avoiding partisan politics. And I'm going to be honest, some of them are a little hard to swallow, but this is the guidance that we have in order to engage in social action and avoid partisan politics. Okay, so first, and the quotations that I shared in the attached document that I have shared with everyone does number these 6. So first, we have to obey those in authority. Now, I know you're thinking, what if I don't think that person in authority is sane? And this is true all over the world. Leaders can be questionable for lots and lots of reasons. But believe it or not, in the Baha'i writings, we are told that we need to be obedient no matter what, no matter the level of sanity of the leader. Baha'u'llah says, what mankind needeth in this day is obedience unto them that are in authority, and faithful adherence to the cord of wisdom, the instruments which are essential to the immediate protection, the security and assurance of the human race have been entrusted to the hands and lie in the grasp of the governors of human society. I want to put this into context because Baha'u'llah said this in the late 1800s, during a time when his mother country was ruled by one of the most ruthless dictators. And this is what he said. So we must not only obey, but we must wish our government well. With the pressure to deny our faith is the only exception. If we're told to deny that we're Baha'is, then we'll resist and we'll disobey the government. But if the government tells us we can no longer meet as a Baha'i community, we will obey them. If they tell us we can't be educated, which is what's happening to Baha'is in Iran right now, we will obey them. So there's a high bar, actually, of obedience to government, but we must also wish them well. It says we must obey and be the well-wishers of the government of the land. Regard disloyalty unto a just king as disloyalty to God himself, and wishing evil to a government a transgression of the cause of God. Now, he says a just king, and so I don't know, this is where our interpretation can kind of, so maybe it's we're obedient to a government, even if it's not just. But maybe we don't have to wish it well unless it's just. I don't know. I don't know what that distinction exactly means. Everyone can read that and interpret it for themselves. Okay, but we know we have to be obedient. Third, we must not even discuss political affairs. Abdu'l-Baha says that the irrefutable command that the Blessed Perfection hath given in tablets, that the believers must obey the kings with the utmost sincerity and fidelity, and he hath forbidden them to interfere with all political problems. He hath even prohibited the believers from discussing political affairs. So I'm going to repeat that because I know it's really, really hard, particularly right now, to be 100% faithful to this. So I'm going to read this again. We must obey the kings with the utmost sincerity and fidelity, and he hath forbidden them to interfere at all with political problems. He hath even prohibited the believers from discussing political affairs, from discussing it. All right. So number 4 rule is that we should not judge just or unjust our government. We shouldn't judge it, whether it's just or unjust. And we are warned that if we do, this will cause disunity. So we're told specifically, we are not the ones as individual Baha'is to judge our government as just or unjust. For each believer would sure to hold a different point of view. And within our own Baha'i fold, a hotbed of dissension would spring up and destroy our unity. So we're told not to discuss this as a matter of preservation of unity. We must build up our Baha'i system and leave the faulty systems of the world to go their own way. We cannot change them through becoming involved in them. On the contrary, they will destroy us. And that's a balance. I feel like every day in my work at the Tahirih Justice Center, I am struggling with that, because it is really, it's hard to be engaged in social justice issues, but then not become mired in them. It's hard to be engaged in the social discourse of our time and not try to become involved. It's a difficult balance. I don't pretend to have it right, but we're told we need to figure it out. Okay, number 5, we cannot judge how someone came into power. We cannot start judging how a particular government came into power, and therefore whether we should obey it or not. This would immediately plunge us into politics. We must obey in all cases except where a spiritual principle is involved, such as denying our faith. For these spiritual principles, we must be willing to die. So we will die for being told to deny our faith, but in other cases, we need to be obedient. Okay, 6. This is the last kind of rule that I found, and others might find other rules. We cannot ridicule those in power. We cannot ridicule those in power, and we can't debase or belittle them, okay? So we're told it is not for a Baha'i in offering social commentary to vilify specific individuals, organizations, or governments, or to make attacks on them. Indeed, the Guardian specifically cautioned the Friends against referring to political figures in their public remarks, whether in criticism or in support. So we must do this not only to avoid political arguments, but also because those in power, commonly ridiculed, are human. So it's interesting that we're told not to do this as a way to avoid partisan politics, but there's another quotation that basically says, yeah, and you shouldn't ridicule, debase, or demean, belittle people, even if they're in power, kind of because they're human and they're part of the same human family. This is a quotation from Abdu'l-Baha. Even though we find a defective branch or leaf, even though we find a defective branch or leaf upon this tree of humanity, or an imperfect blossom, it nevertheless belongs to this tree and not to another. Therefore, it is our duty to protect and cultivate this tree until it reaches perfection. If we examine its fruit and find it imperfect, we must strive to make it perfect. There are souls in the human world who are ignorant. We must make them knowing. Some growing upon the tree are weak and ailing. We must assist them towards health and recovery. If they are infants in development, we must minister to them until they attain maturity. We should never detest or shun them as objectionable and unworthy. We must treat them with honor, respect, and kindness, for God has created them, not Satan. They are not manifestations of the wrath of God, but evidences of his divine favor. God, the Creator, has endowed them with physical, mental, and spiritual qualities that they may seek to know and do his will. Therefore, they are not objects of his wrath and condemnation. In brief, all humanity must be looked upon with love, kindness, and respect. For what we behold in them are none other than the signs and traces of God himself. All are evidences of God. Therefore, how shall we be justified in debasing and belittling them, uttering anathema and preventing them from drawing near unto his mercy? This is ignorance and injustice, displeasing to God, for all in his sights are his servants. So there's a high bar for mercy and kindness and love to everyone, even people who piss us off. Okay, so those are the 6 kind of rules of engagement that I've gleaned from the Baha'i writings. Like I said, others may have more. You may have a different understanding, and that's perfectly okay. I've shared writings that talk about the importance of us engaging in social justice issues, helping to develop laws and policies, and how the fundamental purpose of the Baha'i faith is social change. So the experiment. Now we're going to talk about the experiment. So the Tahirih Justice Center, some of you know, is a Baha'i-inspired nonprofit organization. So we have to deliberately think about how we can apply Baha'i principles to the work that we do. Some of you know already, but the Tahirih Justice Center, what we do as an organization is we provide free legal defense. We have a bunch of lawyers and paralegals on staff. We also have social workers on staff. We help women and girls. We focus on immigrant and refugee women and girls who are fleeing horrific forms of violence. Our clients are fleeing human trafficking, female genital mutilation, child and forced marriage, domestic violence, and other forms of violence. They have suffered in very extreme ways. Our job is not only to provide them free legal defense and then through our social workers help them rebuild their lives and find dignity, but our job is also to advocate for laws and policies in a nonpartisan way that systemically protect women and girls from violence. Now, the Tahirih Justice Center is in 4 cities. We're in San Francisco, Houston, Texas, Baltimore, Washington, D.C., and we're about to open up an office in Atlanta, Georgia. We're litigating about 900 cases at any given time. And we have 73 full-time paid staff. So that's kind of the scale of the work. Most of Tahirih's staff are not Baha'is, like not even most. I mean, we have 73 staff and only 4 of us are Baha'is. Our board of directors is mostly non-Baha'i. And we are not institutionally, we are not funded by the Baha'i faith, nor are we governed by Baha'i institutions. We're independent and we have an independent board of directors. So our money comes from major corporations, foundations, some government funding, individuals. There are some Baha'is who do support us philanthropically as individuals, but they're a small minority of our support. So, so just to give you a sense of the Baha'i nature and the not Baha'i nature of the organization. Okay, but because we're Baha'i-inspired and our purpose is to promote the equality of women and men, our staff, Baha'i or not, are trained on Baha'i principles regarding nonpartisanship, consultation, race unity, justice, equality of women and men, and like the values of any corporation anyone works for, any organization anyone works for, as an employee of that organization, it's your job to apply those values of the organization. And so all of our staff are trained on that. So when it comes to nonpartisanship, we have trainings at Tahirih on it, and we deliberately, like kind of on a daily basis, are having to talk about ways in which we navigate that, particularly right now. And we have been successful. We've like on issues, for example, we were doing a lot of advocacy around the issue of so-called mail order brides. These are women who meet husbands through international marriage brokers, but the problem is they are marketed and they are free. They're like the product to men, American men who have paid a great amount of money to access them. And they're marketed in ways they don't even know they're being marketed as docile, submissive, women who don't speak English and won't know the law. And it's the way they were being marketed was a setup for domestic violence and abuse. And then we were seeing a lot of women who were just horrifically abused by men who were deliberately looking for immigrant women that they viewed as women who they could dominate. And so we were doing a lot of advocacy around that. And we wrote a law that would regulate the industry. And our co-sponsors was Senator Brownback, who's a Republican from Kansas. And Senator Brownback is extremely conservative. And then our other co-sponsor was Senator Maria Cantwell from Washington State. She's known for being extremely liberal. And so we were able, as an organization, to unite both sides of the aisle, and people came together without regard for partisanship in order to protect these women. And so it can be done. We've done it again and again. But as I mentioned earlier, this climate is hard, and we have to be even more mindful. So the week of the elections, just a few months ago, our management team had a meeting, and it was very emotional. And one of the management team members, who's not a Baha'i, said, I think it's time for us to go to our Holy Scripture to get grounded. Now, she's not a Baha'i, but she had this intuition, and she was absolutely right, that we really needed to go back and reread this guidance and try to center ourselves, because our own emotion was making it hard for those of us who've been involved in social justice work so much. And so we read these writings. I stayed up late that night pulling together a compilation, and we took a break and we read all of these writings together. And after that, it was amazing to me, because the staff came back and said, now it's clear to us how we can do this. And we developed a very concrete strategy. It has to do with public messaging. We developed rules for words we could use and rules that we couldn't use. Who we would accept money from. So for example, and we care about optics as well as substance on this. We received $10,000 one time from somebody who put the check in a card that had the cover of the card had the Statue of Liberty covered in a burqa. And it said, "Thank you for stopping the Shariafication of America." And then they gave us $10,000 for that. I called the woman and I said, I think you're misunderstanding what we do. We are not against Islam. We have no fears or concerns of Islam. What we care about is ending violence against women and girls. And that comes from Christians, and it comes from Muslims, and it comes from people of all faiths. And we had a long conversation, and she didn't seem to get it. And she seemed to really believe that to support us in providing legal representation to Muslim women and girls who are facing child marriage or forced marriage or honor crimes or domestic violence was her way of kind of sticking it to Islam. So we sent her check back and refused to accept it. So there are things that we do also in order to make sure that the people supporting us aren't kind of promoting their own agendas, which are not in line with our mission, through their financial support, if that makes any sense. Okay, so coalition engagement is also really tricky. We are collaborative. We work with a lot of coalitions, but we follow this guidance from the Baha'i writings. We're told that it is with such thoughts in mind that Baha'is enter into collaborations as their resources permit with increasing numbers of movements, organizations, groups, and individuals, establishing partnerships that strive to transform society and further the cause of unity, promote human welfare, and contribute to the world of solidarity. Indeed, the standard set by passages such as the above inspires the Baha'i community to become actively engaged in as many aspects of contemporary life as feasible. In choosing areas of collaboration, Baha'is are to bear in mind the principle enshrined in their teachings, that means should be consistent with ends. Noble goals cannot be achieved through unworthy means. Specifically, it is not possible to build enduring unity through endeavors that require contention or assume that an inherent conflict of interest underlies all human interactions, however subtly. That's a deep sentence, because in social justice circles, this is actually very, very common. Again, specifically, it is not possible to build enduring unity through endeavors that require contention or assume that an inherent conflict of interest underlies all human interactions, however subtly. And I think we've got to do a lot of internal work on this, because I've talked to a lot of people who really do believe that there's like an inherent contention because, you work in this industry, but you work in this industry because you have this ethnicity or gender or sexual orientation or life experience that you must be in contention with me or someone else. And we're actually warned about that. It should be noted that despite the limitations imposed by adherence to this principle, the community has not experienced a shortage of opportunities for collaboration. So it's basically saying, like, here are the limitations, but look, there's so many opportunities for coalition and collaboration. So many people in the world today are working intensely towards one or another aim which Baha'is share. In this respect, they also take care not to overstep certain bounds with their colleagues and associates. They are not to regard any joint undertaking as an occasion to impose religious conviction. This is very important, that we have to engage in coalition and in collaboration with others in a pure spirit of service, sincerely desiring to be there as a collaborator, without an ulterior motive to impose our religious convictions. We're told that self-righteousness and other unfortunate manifestations of religious zeal are to be utterly avoided. Baha'is do, however, readily offer to their collaborators the lessons that they have learned through their own experience, just as they are happy to incorporate into their community building efforts insights gained through such association. So there's bi-directional learning here. Baha'is have something to offer, but Baha'is have something to learn also through coalition and through these collaborations. Another concrete principle that Tahirih Justice Center tries to apply is that we will talk to anyone who's willing to talk to us, and we will remain friendly in all of those interactions. There are a number of people right now in social justice circles who are refusing to talk to certain people, and we would never do that as a Baha'i-inspired organization. Shoghi Effendi states in a letter, "Clearly the Guardian feels that we can boldly and fearlessly stand up to oppression whilst remaining friendly. This may seem strange or odd to those of us who have been raised according to the traditions long established by the norms of the old world order." The old world order has this adversarial approach. The old world order believes that we don't have common interests and come at it from an adversarial lens. And then to make matters worse, people like me are actually trained in how to be adversaries. If you know, in law school, I think also in academia, you know, we're on debate team. We're taught to win if we shut someone else down. And so there's a lot of incentive from an old world order context that is in contradiction with how we should be. And so this phrase is something I think really to ponder. We can boldly and fearlessly stand up to oppression while remaining friendly. This may seem odd or strange to those of us who've been raised according to traditions long established by the norms of the old world order. So I accept this because we're told it, but I know I'm on a journey also to understanding it. So another thing that we do at the Tahirih Justice Center very deliberately is to pause and question assumptions that are being made by most social justice organizations and their approaches. I've mentioned some of that earlier, but the House of Justice specifically says unity and cooperation are the important values which should be the watchwords for activities in which believers engage. As a consequence, Baha'is eschew the adversarial approach of dispute and confrontation, and seek rather the methods of consultation, which its commitment to informed discussion and mutual respect, and with its goal, the achievement of consensus in the pursuit of truth. Baha'is aim to persuade others of the correctness of their views through their example and the use of reason. Sorry, I'm not really good at reading things. And the use of reason, and shun the techniques of pressure, condemnation, and abuse, which are a deplorable feature in much of the present day quest for social justice. And I'll tell you, this difference in tone makes us stand out so much. I mean, we'll be in big meetings with like 40 other organizations all sitting around the table talking about a social justice issue. And our staff, and we do all-day trainings with staff on consultation skills, like how to engage in reflective listening, how to engage in open-ended questions, how to posture your words in a way that doesn't sound righteous or superior. We actually do like role-playing around that. How to serve as an ally in a meeting and self-check your own dominance. We actually ask staff, and we talk really openly about your own race and educational background and gender. And people train themselves on how, for example, to keep track of how many times they're talking, like to literally tick on a notebook how many times they've talked. And if they have already spoken twice, when not everyone in the room has yet had a chance to speak, no matter how brilliant, no matter how insightful, they should not speak again. Like, you know, there's just some techniques one can use. And then also maybe to help draw out individuals who are being marginalized, we ask our staff, even if they're not facilitating the meeting, to have an ally eye for who might be trying to say something. You know, everyone has, given our own childhood, our own training, our own upbringing, our own culture, our own gender, we have our own ways of trying to be heard. And for some people, it may be like a little finger that comes up, but you got to be really looking for that finger. You're not going to see it. Some may just lean forward and act like they want to say something. Others may not indicate at all, and they're waiting to be called on. And then others are kind of in your face and interrupting. Everyone has different ways. And we train our staff on how to be mindful, even if they're not the facilitator of the meeting, to watch for that dynamic and not to put anyone on the spot, right? Because if somebody doesn't actually want to say anything, you don't want to embarrass them or call them out, but to gently invite anyone who hasn't spoken yet to say something, or provide other mechanisms like writing something down anonymously or that kind of thing. So anyway, I won't, it's literally an all-day training, so I won't go into all the details, but there are little things we can do to watch our tone, our presence, obviously our nonpartisan character, but to try to adhere as best as we can, we're all human, to this quotation that tells us very deliberately to persuade others of the correctness of our views through our example, the use of reason, and to shun techniques of pressure, condemnation, and abuse. It's a lot to think about. Okay, we're also really mindful of optics. So we've talked a lot about substance, but the Baha'i writings actually tell us that we need to worry about how things look in addition to how things really are. We're told by Shoghi Effendi, it says, let them so shape their lives and regulate their conduct that no charge of secrecy, fraud, or of bribery or intimidation may, however ill-founded, be brought against them. Let them rise above all particularism and partisanship, above the vain disputes, petty calculations, and transient passions that agitate the face and engage the attention of a changing world. So we're really told to just rise above all of that, not only in fact, but in appearance. And this is actually very important. So just to give you one example, and like I said, I don't think we totally have it right. I'm sure we screw up all the time. It's a line we're always trying to walk. But in one example, as a result of our advocacy, particularly around the issue of so-called mail order brides and international marriage brokers, we were given an award. It was in that year when we got the bill passed by a Republican committee and by a Democratic committee. And it was interesting because the language of the letter presumed that we were of Democratic leaning and that we were of Republican leaning. The fact that we confused them all equally, I think, was maybe good, but we refused to accept either award because the optics of it would have been inappropriate. And there are a lot of other examples. I will say, and I know this is loaded in the House of Justice, or the NSA already sent out a letter about this, but the Tahirih Justice Center decided not to participate in the march the day after the elections. It was the March on Women, Women's March in Washington. I mean, I know so many people went, and many Tahirih staff went as individuals, but we decided not to appear as an organization because it really was very clearly organized in response to words of Trump, and it was the day after his inauguration. And so it had, even though one could argue that there were many there for nonpartisan reasons, and I buy that argument, one could argue that the event itself had nonpartisan ends, and I totally agree with that. The problem is, particularly for an organization like the Tahirih Justice Center, the optics of it were unequivocally partisan. Without question, everyone in Washington knew. And so we did not participate in the Women's March as a result of that. Anyway, there are other examples of that, but we have to be mindful of the optics as well as the substance. And then internally, we have a nonpartisan strategy as well, because this is emotional stuff and people bring their baggage and bring their feelings, and we allow for that. So we have to keep track of our time in 15-minute increments for a lot of our government grant requirements. And so we have a personal time billing code that people can account their time for that allow them to breathe and just take a walk around the block and decompress. You know, given the work that we do, if you've just been listening to an 8-year-old describe being gang raped for 2 weeks while she was being held by a human trafficker, you may need a walk around the block after that. You may need to cut your day short. You may need to do watch, I don't know, cute, fluffy kitten videos on YouTube. And that is totally fine, because it's really important that we take care of ourselves as we're doing that work. And this is also true for these really contentious times that we're living in. We do like a stretch and breathe exercise mid-afternoon in a lot of our offices. We fully pay for therapy and have that as a part of our mental health healthcare plan. When something cataclysmic happens, offices will often gather for prayer in our conference room. Different racial incidences, political incidences, natural disaster incidences. Sometimes we need to just all be with each other, bring whatever religion we have, whatever spiritual perspective, poems, people share dreams, and we just have to like breathe, exhale, and elevate ourselves and center ourselves. Adherence to core values is a part of our annual evaluation. So all staff are actually judged and evaluated in their annual evaluations on their adherence to core values, things like whether they backbite, things like how well they use consultation as a decision-making tool, things like how nonpartisan they are. And so this is it's a point of performance for our staff, most of whom are not Baha'i, around this idea of adhering to the core values of the organization. Okay, so we're nearly at the end. We've talked about how difficult the times are that we're living in. We've talked about how we have very special guidance in the Baha'i writings that Baha'is don't have a monopoly on, but that we have the original text around and we can turn to for guidance, and we have an obligation to be engaged in social justice issues. We've talked about some of those rules of engagement in order to remain nonpartisan, and I've shared with you a little bit about the experience of the Tahirih Justice Center and trying to navigate some of that. So in closing, what I want to say is that in a way, all of this stuff is detail. And when we step back and we look at the true solution, we know that what's most important, above all of our concerns about navigating nonpartisanship, is the warning that we remain centered on the true solution, which is the recognition of the oneness of humanity. If we understood the oneness of humanity, we wouldn't need any of this. If we understood the oneness of humanity, social justice wouldn't be a thing. It wouldn't be needed. Partisanship wouldn't be contentious. If we really understood the oneness of humanity, and that is in many ways the bottom line of the Baha'i faith, is the principle of the oneness of humanity. That's like the so what of all of it. And we wouldn't even need to be navigating all of these little things. But until we're there, we have a lot to navigate. So to underscore this, Shoghi Effendi says, let there be no mistake that the principle of the oneness of mankind, the pivot round which all teachings of Baha'u'llah revolve, is no mere outburst of ignorant emotionalism or an expression of vague and pious hope. This is not like, it's not a card to use. It's not a pious pie in the sky. It's real and it's possible and it's necessary and it's needed. We're told it's not an expression of vague and pious hope. It calls for no less than the reconstruction and the demilitarization of the whole civilized world, a world organically unified in all the essential aspects of its life. Its political machinery, its spiritual aspirations, its trade and finance, its script and language, and yet infinite in the diversity and of the national characteristics of its federated unit. So this notion of the oneness of humanity is like the punchline of all of this. And so in the Baha'i writings, what I think is really powerful is that we're called not only to recognize the oneness of humanity as the true solution to all of the ills of humanity, we're told to do more than that. We're told to go beyond that. And we're told to, in fact, prefer others to ourselves. To, in fact, prefer not only like we're one and the same, but I prefer you to myself. And that's deep, because what would that look like? If we really had a society where we not only understood the oneness of mankind, but we preferred others to ourselves, what would that look like? Shoghi Effendi says, without hesitation, Shoghi Effendi says that our faith requires us to subordinate, without hesitation or equivocation, every particularistic interest, be it personal, regional, or national, to the paramount interests of humanity. So we're actually told to subordinate our own personal interests, subordinate our individual interests to the interests of humanity, firmly convinced that in a world of interdependent people and nations, the advantage of the part is best to be reached by the advantage of the whole, and that no abiding benefit can be conferred upon the component parts if the general interests of the entity itself are ignored or neglected. I think it's really powerful because, I don't know, what would that look like? Like, I feel like if we really got that, it would mean that we actually are willing to pay 14 cents more per hamburger so that the person who's making the hamburger actually has a living wage and doesn't have to work 2 jobs just to provide for childcare for her family, as well as to pay for rent and food, which then means that she never gets to see her children, and she loves her children just as much as any other mother loves her children. And this is the circumstance of many of the Tahirih Justice Center's clients. And we have this system that makes it impossible for them that I feel very passionately about, but and sorry, I'll try not to go down that road too much, but what would it look like if we really recognize the oneness of humanity and we not only wanted others to be treated as we would want to be treated, but we even preferred them to ourselves? One more soapbox. Many people don't realize this, but baby formula is the #1 most stolen item from grocery stores. Go to your grocery store and look and find where the big canisters of baby formula are. They will likely be behind a locked glass container. And I was shocked because, I expect to see alcohol or maybe cigarettes, but baby formula, in fact, is the #1 most stolen item from grocery stores. Now, you don't steal baby formula for self-gratification. You steal it to feed your baby. And you need baby formula if you can't nurse. And you can't nurse if you're working multiple jobs, particularly those that require you to stand up all the time and those that don't offer you any privacy, any parental leave, or any sick time. And so, again, I think if we really embody this principle as we walk through the world and we notice these little things, they would become absolutely intolerable to us. We could talk about property taxes and the funding of schools. If we really believed in this principle, I kind of think we would allow our property tax to go not only way out of our own county and our own school, but to help other people where right now we hoard these resources. Anyway, okay, so oneness of humanity is truly the solution. It's the thing that we should be working for and teaching the faith and building our communities. We need to be focused on that because that is the true solution to all of these problems. In fact, in a 1996 letter written to an American believer specifically around the issue of the plight of African American men, the House of Justice said, if we are to avoid becoming entrammelled in the enervating coils of cynicism, which are characteristic of this age of transition, we must, as the custodians of the forces of love, ground our efforts in indomitable faith in the future of the cause of God will spread throughout America. Millions will be enlisted under its banner, and race prejudice will finally be exorcised from the body politic. Of this, have no doubt. It is inexorable. Sorry, I'm really not good at reading things out loud. Because it is the will of Almighty God. However, as the House of Justice has been trying to get the Friends to understand for some time, which it's interesting, different tone. However, as the House of Justice has been trying to get the Friends to understand for some time, the necessary precondition to the translation of our community's social vision into reality is a massive expansion of the cause. That is the necessary precondition to the translation of our community's social vision into reality. Those who fail to comprehend the urgency assigned to the objective of achieving a large expansion have obviously failed to appreciate the moral imperative behind this aim. It's like a strong letter, actually. The language is quite strong. So it's important for us to not lose sight of that. So we have a lot to do, and we will fail. We will say dumb things. We will momentarily lose our focus. We will become angry with one another. We will be challenged by the writings and what the writings call us to do in a really high standard that we might think is impossible, so why even try? We will. It's inevitable because we're imperfect and we're human. We'll make mistakes, but we must act and we must have confidence in our efforts. Because above all, we should have confidence in the faith of God and in the divine assistance that will be there for us when we are teaching the faith, when we are implementing the oneness of humanity, and when we are engaged in issues of social justice. And we have been assured of this. The last quotation that I will read is this one from the Universal House of Justice in 2001 that says, in responding to the challenges, whether immediate or long-term, that the Baha'i principles of social justice entail, it is vital that none of us lose sight, even momentarily, of the goal towards which all of our efforts are bent. Know thou of a truth, Baha'u'llah declares, these great oppressions that have befallen the world are preparing it for the most great justice. However great the demands of the work in which we are engaged, and however stressful it will undoubtedly become, we can be confident that the forces released in this age of transition, this greatest crisis in the history of the human race, ultimately reinforce the efforts we make, swell the ranks of the community we are building, and empower the cause we serve to achieve every objective its founder has decreed for us. So it's okay. It'll be okay. It really sucks right now. We have a lot of work to do. We are told that it will undoubtedly be difficult. It will be incredibly stressful and it will be hard. We're assured of that. So we should just accept it and know that it's going to be not comfortable. It won't be easy. It won't make us feel safe all the time. And it'll be really exhausting and it'll be really tiring. But it's like any muscle. Until we use that muscle, it'll be super sore. It'll be very painful the first time we engage it. We may not even be able to sleep the first night that we first use that muscle. But then it'll get easier. It'll get stronger. We'll start to develop muscle memory. It'll get better. And so I think particularly for those who may be new to social justice work, and this is true for people who've been in social justice work for a long time, we're all developing those muscles. None of us has it right. None of us knows exactly what we're doing. But I think all we can do is just commit to go to the gym together and work on those muscles of social justice. So thank you all for being in this gym tonight and webinar. And that's it. That's all I have. And so now I'm going to turn to the questions and see. And if you have additional questions or comments, feel free to raise them.
There are a couple questions on the chat.
Okay, I haven't had a chance to see them. Hossein, do you want to pull out some questions that you think are?
Sure.
I'll start scrolling through.
So this one says, the Baha'is in Iran are... Okay, the Baha'is in Iran are... Is there an exception due to education gained from outside of the country?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. Let's see. Wait a minute. I'm not seeing. Is there exception due to the fact that education is gained from outside the country? Oh, that's an interesting question. I don't know. I don't really know the right answer to that, to be honest. I mean, I think the Baha'is in Iran have been. We know that they have been incredibly obedient, and they don't have an administrative order because the government has told them they can't. There are a number of things that they have been told they can't do, and it's a huge sacrifice and a huge suppression for them to not engage in. Now, my understanding, which may be partly in the answer, is that they haven't been told they're not allowed to receive an education. They're just not allowed to be admitted to Iranian schools and universities. So that may be a technicality that somebody else is better educated on, but it's my understanding that they're not being admitted to Iranian universities and have limitations with Iranian schools. But I'm not sure there's a law in the government, basically, that says they're not allowed to receive an education. So sorry, I don't feel like I can answer that question with a whole lot of certainty, but that's the one thought I have on it. So going down to another question. In your understanding, do we die for all the principles? For example, if the government orders the citizens to not associate with Muslims, should we die for that principle? No. So the only thing that we're told to die for is if someone tells us to recant our faith. So, for example, and this is another good example from Baha'is in Iran who've literally been tortured and are told, look, this can end for you. We will let you go. We will admit you to school. We will stop torturing you. All you have to do is say you're not a Baha'i. And that's the one thing that we'll die for is, saying that we're not a Baha'i. Now, you say if the government orders the citizens to not associate with Muslims. Now, a really neat historic example, I think, of this is the example of Louis Gregory. So Louis Gregory, a hand of the cause of the faith, one of the earliest believers who was African-American, married a white woman. He did it at a time when marrying a white woman was illegal in many states. But I think what's interesting about their example is they didn't actually violate the law. They got married in a place where it was legal. And then when they traveled together and it was not legal for them to travel in the same train carriage, they actually traveled separately. So I don't know if that's a good example, given what you were saying with Muslims, but there was a remarkable level, even in that instance, where they loved each other, they got married, but they still remained obedient to the laws of the country around interracial interactions, even though they knew that that was wrong. So there wasn't like civil disobedience. They didn't engage in civil disobedience, for example. Okay. And then let's see, just going down. Okay, so someone pulled that one quote in the Baha'i writings that says you don't have to be nice to people if they're a thief, a tyrant, a traitor. Now, this quote is tricky, I think, and I don't claim to understand it, to be honest. It confuses me a little bit sometimes because they're like 1,000 quotes about how we have to treat people with kindness no matter what. There are all these Baha'i quotations around treating. Like love your enemy. If he stabs you in the heart, be a healing balm to his sores. If he poisons you, give him honey in return. Forgive everything. I mean, there's such a high bar, and there's so many writings that are so forgiving and merciful and treat even the worst people with kindness. Then this quote comes up, and it seems to fall in contradiction with that. And I'm going to be honest with you. I've actually written I've written a letter to the House of Justice about this quote because it's confusing me, and I'm a little wigged out by it. Because there's a side to me, and it might be the lawyerly side to me, that looks at these phrases: tyrant, traitor, and thief, and those are legal designations. Like when you give someone a label like that, you don't give it to people just because you don't like them. Like, you know what I mean? It's not an insult. It's not something you can hurl at somebody, even if you think they're an awful, awful human being. Those are legally designatable, usually after a jury trial, usually after some process of justice where there's evidence and somebody says, I'm not a thief. And you say, well, I think you're a thief. And, at some point a judge or a jury actually figures that out, and then they are proclaimed a thief. And so I wonder if this quotation is really meant to apply to people who've gone through some judicial process, which would then make the other quotations where as individuals we're told to forgive. And then there are other Baha'i quotations that talk about justice being implemented by society. So as individuals, we're supposed to forgive. If you rape me, if you murder my son, I'm actually supposed to forgive you. But society is supposed to implement justice. And that is such a huge relief. I mean, as somebody who works with victims in justice issues, to ask the victim to have to hold on to hatred and hold on to resentment and hold on to anger is a worse life sentence. And I've watched the most healthy of my clients, and many of them are turning to their own faiths, either Christianity or Islam. They confront the person who abused them. They engage in the pursuit of justice, but as individuals, they forgive them. As individuals, they'll basically say, you know what? I don't know what you've been through in your life, and I hope God has mercy on you. I forgive you for killing my son. It's profound. But as a society, we have to implement justice. And so that's why the prosecutor works for the state, not for the victim. They're not a lawyer of the victim. They work for the state. And in fact, some of our clients have said to prosecutors, you know what, particularly in the case of domestic violence, I now forgive him. He says he's sorry. I believe him. I don't want to prosecute. And then the prosecutor turns to her and says, well, good for you. Glad that you've forgiven him. But I work for the state. I don't work for you. And as a state, we have an interest in making sure that people don't hit each other. And we have a justice system that's designed to prevent that. And so we are prosecuting this case and, pursuing it in a court of law. So we have this segregation in American society. And the Baha'i faith basically also has this segregation around justice being the job of societies and institutions in societies, individuals who work for those institutions. But as individuals, we're supposed to forgive and have mercy. And so to me, that's one interpretation of this quotation. But like I said, it has so perplexed me that I've actually written a letter to the House of Justice because I would love for them to address what seems to be a contradiction and something that I've actually struggled with. So.